Welcome to the Boston Art Podcast,
Boston's premier art podcast,
where we talk art, culture, and philosophy.
My name is Theodore Earthworms.
And I am Brian Huntress.
Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, Theo and Brian here to provide some quick context for the upcoming episode.
What you're about to listen to is the third segment in a 7-part interview series we recorded this fall about an exhibition that is currently on view at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
This exhibition is titled Touching Roots, Black Ancestral Legacies in the Americas, and it is located on the 3rd floor of the Art of the Americas wing in the MFA.
This exhibition is included with general admission, so there's no extra cost to see it, and we highly recommend you check it out.
This week's interview segment is with contemporary artist Karen Hampton.
Karen is a renowned and accomplished weaver and award-winning artist, and she's the first artist we spoke to whose work is exhibited in Touching Roots.
Her piece is titled Memories. Made in 1990, it is a beautiful, strip-woven, double-weave, cotton abstract piece, which we will discuss, among other things, in the following interview.
We were able to talk to a bunch of curators and artists involved in the exhibition, and for the sake of clarity, we're going to release these in chronological order so you can learn with us.
Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the show.
So, first things first, we're so excited to talk to you. It's a huge honor. We got to look at your artwork, and it was super interesting. And you're actually the first artist that we've been able to meet with work in the MFA.
Oh, that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting for us too to be able to, see, history happening with such beautiful art and at this level.
Yeah. Could you, for the listener, kind of give us a little bit of a background on what you do in your own words?
I'm a textile artist. I'm a mixed media textile artist. I weave and I stitch, and I'm a storyteller.
Wonderful.
And I noticed that, you talk a lot in your artist statement and in some of your writings about, genealogy and a connection to your ancestry, while also talking about textile weaving and its historical roots. Could you tell us about how you use your artistic medium to connect, I guess, to your ancestry and to your background?
Well, I've been weaving for a long time now. I started when I was 17. And about 15 years into it, around 1990, I really wanted to find a deeper connection to my textiles. And I started by first really focusing on imagery and including things like that within my weavings. From there, I went on to ask questions. One of the big questions was, why are there so few African American weavers? And that question eventually led me to grad school, where that was my topic, and my topic became African American women in textile production from 1750 to 1830. And in doing that work, it meant that I had to do field work. My undergraduate degree is in art and anthropology, and I did field work. And during that time in 1999, I visited 11 plantations and other historical sites. So that took me into the realm of how to translate that into my artwork. And one of the things I found was that I found the land talk to me, that there was this whole relationship to land and landscape. And so I began to use that as the feeder for my artwork. And then it just by chance, I was introduced to levels of my own genealogy shortly after graduate school that I had not been introduced to before, and that really took me into the depth of finding out my own story and using that as a feeder for my artwork.
Could you tell us about the beginning of your textile work? How did you learn when you were 17? And what kind of art were you doing before that?
I had always done crafts. My mother didn't like um, noisy children, so she fed us craft kits. And so I made a lot of crafts, and my grandmother had been a seamstress, and she lived with us. And so I learned to sew very early. So that was where I started, and then I started weaving my last semester in high school.
And in terms of weaving, was this something that you had learned on your own through like books, or did you learn from
No,
a family member?
I was taking a class in high school.
Oh,
I
okay.
took a class. My last semester of high school, I let myself take art classes. I hadn't taken on any art classes in high school and until that point, but I took a design craft class, and as it happened, we had a student teacher that had learned to weave, and so he gave us a weaving project. And it was somewhere during that period of time, however many weeks we spent on the project, um, where I was like taking it on the bus with me. I had a very long bus ride every day. And I was working on it, and it was like I had an epiphany. I could do this for the rest of my life.
And it seems like that is exactly what you did.
Yeah. Well, a lot of other things happened that kept me in those early years that were very coincidental that happened, but since I like to believe that nothing's an accident, um, uh, it really encouraged me. Like when I started college, and I was first going to junior college, and lo and behold, they offered weaving, and while it didn't really strike me as anything unusual. Sorry about this.
No
That's all
problem.
right.
We got dogs here too. What kind of dog is that?
I have 3 of them.
Oh, cute.
2 terriers and 1 German Shepherd.
Gotcha.
Aw.
Sounds like a
So
bunch of fun.
Yeah, they're going to take care of the world.
So, what were you saying?
Oh, but what I was let's see. Oh, now I lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's okay. We have all kinds of questions. Something that I was curious about too is you were talking about studying, I think you said anthropology and history and things like that, or you're visiting these sites. So I'm curious, what was the process like in visiting these plantations? And you said learning about the the land speaking to you and learning about different mediums through these studies. Can you tell us about the process you went through in like visiting this plantation, and what kind of things were you looking for, or people you were communicating with, and how were you learning about these techniques?
Sure. Well, it was really, I mean, I went in totally green.
Wow.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was coming from California, and I had spent almost no time in the South, and I had been hearing all about the new South, and that the South was very, was owning its history. And it so happened I went to graduate school when I was 40, and this and it was the same time as the internet exploded. And the internet had 2 really incredible things that its largest search things were genealogy and plantations.
Oh, wow.
And strange it seems. And my department happened to have a research assistant. And so she was really interested in what I was doing. So she assisted me in my digging, to make sure that I knew how to do it all. And so I had done lots of research, and I was really happy that I went to an open stack school so that I could just go in the library and just go through everything that I needed, whether I knew I needed it or not. And so I'd done a lot of research, and I had mapped what plantations I would go to, and I mapped them according to them having some relationship to weaving. And I was looking in the low country of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, because I was really looking at colonial weaving and colonial history. And I was looking at 3 topics. I was looking at indigo as the second largest field crop. I was looking at plantation weaving, and cotton is king. So I had 3 different lenses that I was looking through, and then, but my whole scope was open enough so that if I got a lead from any one plantation, I could just easily go and visit a new lead.
Interesting.
And in doing this, you were documenting the history, like how these kinds of weaving were passed down and the differences between them?
No, I was looking for, because I couldn't find anything in the library or interlibrary loan on that really talked about African American women weaving or had any history to it. And so I was going kind of like, I was an investigator going to go find that, what was this relationship where, because it just had been something that had been very lonely for me. And so I was, I wasn't a quilter.
Yeah.
And I was drawn to this medium. I loved this medium. And, and so I was combating that.
Yeah. That sounds like a very lonely thing to not have that history to learn from and look to while you're learning that process.
Especially considering... go ahead.
Oh, I just was going to say, it took me a long time to realize that I was that, that it was like that. But once I did, then it became a problem to try to reckon with.
Yeah. How long were you doing this research?
Let's see. Well, I did it while I was in grad school for 2 years.
Wow. What do you feel... How am I phrasing this? I guess, what do you feel that your findings were, and do you think that it impacted your journey from beginning to end? Like, when you walked away from that project or when you had completed it in grad school, do you feel like your findings were something that changed the way that you make your art?
Oh, more than that, it changed my life.
Yeah.
That one of the experiences that I had, and I even remember where I had it. I was at UNC and going through their library, libraries were secondary sources because my primary sources were actually walking on the landscape. But I was tracking things down, and I was tracking down certain planters and going through their boxes and things like that. And there was this moment as I'm sitting there with white gloves on, and I just became giddy. And I was giddy because I kept thinking about this planter and how he'd be turning in his grave if he were to see me going through his things. And, and because I really believe that there is power in looking the enemy in the face
Mm-hmm.
and exposing the enemy. And so that was what I used to guide myself as I was doing that work.
Yeah.
I'm curious too about some of the technical aspects, because you learned how to weave in your class, and you were and probably a lot of classes in personal study, and you were researching, this history and genealogy through libraries and through these visits. I'm curious about the techniques that you were implementing in your work, because looking at some of your work, these are obviously like really advanced and beautiful weavings. Were you able to look at specific artifacts and examples of African American weaving that may have been produced on these plantations?
I visited. I have visited a number of museum collections,
Right.
and in doing things like that, I've seen things that might be. It's very hard to know who made what, except for the fact that what I was able to find was that within the plantation, that everything comes down to economics. And so it was very, African American women were taught to weave during slavery, and they were taught to weave the cloth that they would wear.
Oh, so they were able. So, I mean, obviously they Okay, I guess I'm interested. Were they able to? Did that kind of turn into a self-expression for a lot of them? Were they able to?
No, it was not a self-expression at all.
It was purely utilitarian.
Yeah, and it was purely at the hands of the master.
Yeah.
Or the mistress. So I mean, there's so much that's learned in terms of class and race and dynamics of slavery and indentured servitude.
I'm also curious about these portraits that I see on your website in terms of weavings. I don't know if this is an older body of work.
Those aren't even, if you're looking under portraits.
Okay.
Those are not hand woven. Those are stitched pieces. And those portraits are all where I'm used, because I use all different textile techniques. Those are, what I'm doing is that I'm printing on the fabric, and then I'm stitching it together in the information. They're two different layers of fabric, and they're being brought together. And if you're looking at the abolitionist series, which are at I think the top 12 or something like that, that those were another research trip, and where I was in central New York, and I was researching the abolitionists of central New York. And what I was doing was that I was taking information from each one of the abolitionists' life and then using it with a portrait of them in it. It was something that related directly to them. So like the one with Frederick Douglass, you're looking at actually a swatch of wallpaper that I had collected years before. I'd taken a photograph of it at Frederick Douglass's home in D.C.
Oh, wow.
And so I used that years later to abstract it a little, but not much, and use that in the portrait with Frederick Douglass. Because I really feel like everyone is impacted by everything that is around them. And in that case, this was wallpaper that he was living in this house with.
Yeah,
Right.
pattern he would have seen every day.
Yeah.
Also, did you mention earlier that you began your college studies at age 40?
No, my graduate studies.
Oh, your graduate studies. Something
Yeah.
we found something that really inspires us, so we found interesting, is that we've talked to a lot of artists that actually went to school or started formal education later in life than traditional age of just leaving high school. I'm kind of curious about what your experience was in academia, or like what eventually led you to want to formally study these things, and what were you doing before that?
Well, okay, so I was a practicing artist, and I'll go back to the 80s. I was a practicing artist. I actually had a farm.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
In California?
Yeah, in Northern California.
Beautiful.
And so I was growing dye plants, and I had a studio, and I was working in my studio a lot, um, and then we reached the point where we were working too hard to survive. So then we ended up back in the city, and at that point I decided, because I had left school after a couple years early on, and I decided to re-enter school. And when I re-entered school, I spent a year and a half to finish my degree, and that work was in art and anthropology. I'd done most of my art credits, but then I finished my anthropology, and my classwork finished at the end of 91.
What kind of student were you when you were doing your original art credits? Did it kind of come easy to you, or was it, I guess, were you like extremely focused and studious?
I loved being in school.
Huh.
I
asked that because I'm historically a terrible student.
I think I always felt like school was a gift, and that it allowed me to expand my mind. And I had gone to an alternative high school, and one of the things that really, I think it influenced me, because it still does, is that I had a teacher that that had a sign on his wall that said, "Think for yourself, your teacher could be wrong."
That's interesting. That's a powerful concept to be exposed to as a teenager too, I think.
Right, the idea of questioning authority and stuff. Could you tell us what kind of... I also went to an alternative school for a period of time. What was what type of school were you in?
It was a public school. It was the first alternative public school in LA.
Wow.
And it really had a very psychological base to it.
Interesting.
But it was, I graduated in 75, so, those were some pretty interesting years to be in high school.
I believe it. What I'm kind of interested too, like I feel like alternative schools that were kind of focused on psychology and stuff are pretty uncommon right now, I feel like, and to hear that somebody was going to one in the 70s, like did your parents kind of find out about this and thought it was interesting and thought you would do really good there or something, or how did you end up in a program like that?
Well, let's see, when I was in the 9th grade, there was an assembly at school, and they came and they talked about the school, and it sounded really interesting. It sounded, I don't know, I don't remember what particularly drew me to it, but it sounded really, really, really interesting. And so, I filled out a form, and there was a lottery, and I was accepted.
Wow. So you just followed your heart, and you ended up in this new, interesting educational setting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it
So also,
I think it took me out of my general norm, and it definitely expanded how I thought about the world.
right, because the traditional public school education can be pretty limiting, especially in terms of like culture or like learning about, I don't know, emotional intelligence or even things of that nature.
Yeah, and boredom is an enemy.
Right. Could you tell us about so you graduated from the school, then eventually got some art credits. What were you doing? You know, I'm sure you were like a very serious artist while you were just doing, even before grad school and stuff and all this started. Like,
Oh yeah.
were you doing shows, or were you like with a lot of other art students, like out like learning things and getting into all kinds of stuff? Like what was like your day-to-day like?
Let's see. That's it. Let's see. Oh, these dogs are really a pain in the neck.
Oh yeah, take your
Okay.
time. It's all good.
Uh, let's see. I once I moved back from the country, I was teaching art. I started teaching art, and I taught art to kids.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
And was very much in that scene of teaching everything from drawing and painting to all different types of textiles, to paper making, to weaving, all of that stuff. And I did that, for like 12 years. And I was, one of the most popular art teachers in that capacity.
Hmm. Do you feel like it made you a better artist, teaching all your techniques?
Absolutely. And being with kids, being fed by kids.
Oh.
I've always felt that my own kids feed me, and that the kids that I taught fed me as well. And I lived for 10 years. 10 of those 12 years I lived in an artist's warehouse.
An office warehouse?
No, an artist warehouse.
Oh, an artist warehouse. Okay.
Yeah. And
Wow.
so I was around a lot of graduate students in painting a new genre and learning about conceptual art and all of that. Those were who my friend base were, and so I just kept learning.
That sounds really intellectually stimulating, to be around that kind of energy all the time.
Yeah, for me, there are two types of energies I really like. Either being around a whole lot of artists, or being in the country away from everybody.
Yeah.
Right. Those are definitely two things that fill up your soul.
Yeah.
I'm curious too about what was so when you were living in this warehouse, was this in Los Angeles?
This was in the Bay Area in
Okay.
Oakland.
And especially in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, where artist warehouse living was extremely popular in Boston as well. It still is in some ways, but it's definitely a very, very different real estate landscape.
Yeah, but I found it in Lowell.
Oh, you found it in Lowell. Do you practice in
Yeah.
Lowell right now?
No, I just have moved out of Massachusetts
Oh,
this
right,
summer.
Of course.
But I lived at Western Ave Studios in Lowell for the last years.
Oh, wow.
And Western Ave is the second largest artist community in the country, I believe.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so it's a very, in that respect, a very stimulating place. I was in a building where there were 50 live work studios.
Wow. And I also, just to circle back a little bit, so at what point, when did you start the farm?
The farm, in the early 80s.
Oh, okay. And you said you were growing dye plants there, so you were working with
Yeah,
plants that you were growing to do your
Yeah.
textile work?
yeah.
That's really cool. That's interesting.
And like people talk a lot right now about sustainability and being able to live off of their own creations and stuff. Was it part of like, maybe in a spiritual way or just through your artistic, maybe even through your artist statement? Like, did you feel like was it utilitarian, just growing these things and using them for your medium, or did it have like a?
No. This was like a dream I had from when I was 12.
Wow.
That, that this was the kind of lifestyle I wanted and what I wanted to do. I didn't really, I didn't have the nuances of it then. And when I was 12, I just wanted to be able to rescue all the dogs in the pound.
Yeah.
But, from there it began, I spent a lot of time on people's farms and stuff and really learning, how to live an alternative life. And so, that was kind of my thing.
Something that we love to ask almost all of our guests is about mentorship and about like maybe an older artist or person in their life that really, showed them a new path or really, kind of illuminated, their education and their artistry. Did you have one or even many mentors?
I've had many mentors, and I seriously would not be doing what I'm doing now if it were not for my mentor. In the, I think it was in 97 when I apprenticed with a master weaver, Ida Gray, and I apprenticed with her for 1.5 years. And that's really where I became a weaver.
How did you connect with her?
There was a magazine, and now it's called the American Craft Council, but then it was the American Craft Council, but the magazine was Craft Horizons then. And in the back of Craft Horizons, they would advertise all sorts of different things, but one of the things was apprenticeships, and the Bolinas Crafts Guild was what I found out about. And I was at that point, I was trying to make a real decision. Am I going to go to art school or am I going to do an apprenticeship? And I decided to do an apprenticeship because I really wanted to do this concentration in weaving. And so anyway, I wove, it was like a 40-hour-a-week job working with her.
Wow.
2/3 of the work I produced was for her and 1/3 for myself.
And was this in her studio?
Yes.
So what was that like, being in this new environment? Like, was it like a little family? Like, did you guys become best friends to work late into the night?
Close. It was like, we became really close once we realized that we had the same birthday.
Oh, wow.
That, like I turned 21 while I was there, and she turned 63.
Wow.
So I was 1/3 her age, and we just talked a lot. She was someone I could talk about race to, and talk about the textile world. And she had lineage in her artistic lineage. It went back to Black Mountain and the Bauhaus, and so there was a lot of that kind of education during that period as well.
Wow. And to think that go ahead, please go ahead.
And she had just finished writing her second book at that time, and that book is titled Nature's Colors, and it's still considered to be one of the best books on natural dyes.
Oh, wow.
What a beautiful thing. And to think that she probably also, when she was a young woman, probably also had that kind of mentorship or connection to an older artist? Like, I've been a believer for a long time now that passing of knowledge and experience and even just, you know, emotional and friendship connection between older and younger artists is like the key to the future in the universe. You know, it changes everything.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there's a different kind of learning that is also that kind of because it's all based on a relationship and on trust. It's individualized. That I think that's some of the strongest, most important knowledge.
Wow.
So I'm also curious, I noticed you earlier in the interview, you used the word craft, that you had been really focused on craft and then you eventually found yourself interested in weaving. I don't know, like maybe you don't pay attention to this kind of discourse, it's kind of, maybe it's stupid anyway, but do you feel like there's any credence to this conversation people have, or why they have this conversation about the difference of craft and art?
Well, there's been a real division, and it's kind of interesting on many levels. When I first entered the art world, when I was in my first weaving class in college, and was really introduced to that whole thing that weaving at that point was considered lesser than fine art.
Right.
And so I always work to bridge that. That has been one of my main intentions in how I worked and everything else. So it has meant that my learning has been far more than just my craft. You know, if I just wove, then that's fine. I mean, I spent years doing rugs and curtains and this and that, and, you know, household things, and can always do that if it's needed. But I really saw myself as an artist, and so my arts education had to extend much farther. And I always felt that one of the things that really was the thing that kept weaving from the lens of fine art was the figure. And so it became very important for me to figure out how to incorporate the figure into my work, you know, because I was not something like an abstract expressionist or something like that.
Because during this time, wasn't that like the at the height of the abstract expressionist, or the rise of kind of neo-expressionism and modernism?
Yeah, but you have to understand that weavers are a different.
It's a different game.
It's a completely different game.
Right.
So I always saw that I could, you know, go across and find my own directions.
How was that for those first few experiences, or those first few pieces, trying to incorporate the figure into your weaving?
Oh, it was really scary.
I believe it, because the figure is pretty intimidating in general.
Yeah, and I thought about it in many ways. I mean, because I knew that I couldn't do it in tapestry, because I was not going to do really, really fine tapestry. But I thought about how I could make a very interesting cloth, and how I could use my weaving as a canvas. And so, you know, an expression that I use is that Robert Rauschenberg is my favorite dead white man artist. You know, and it's really because of how he broke out of tradition and started working in so many mixed media things.
Right, was he doing
He
like
did
collaging and printmaking, it looks
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, and sculpture and all of these things together. And that's really the path and the direction that I began to follow.
Kind of transcending the typical bounds of the medium.
Yeah, that goes back to my high school experience. It's like, you know, it doesn't have to be linear.
Right, and sometimes the teacher is wrong. Right,
Yeah.
and like, and I can see in your work, like I can definitely see such a, like it seems like, while these are weavings or are fiber art pieces, like they look like collages.
Yeah.
The way
they
that
are.
a lot of these figurative ones are put together in like such a cool way.
And I really, believe in, like I am a really strong advocate of watching movies, videos, and things like that about artists' lives to try to understand how they came to be who they were. And so, because I think that, again, education doesn't have to be linear.
Yeah. And identity and the ways that a person perceives the world around them is so important in understanding the context of their work.
Yeah. And I just was not, I was out, I had been treated like an outsider. And really, something I haven't talked about was that through the 80s, no matter how, I did beautiful landscapes, and I did, I don't know, and I was doing fashion that was really, is still really within the context of what wearable art was and everything else. I was trying hard to fit in. And no matter how hard I tried to fit in, my work was not accepted. And so I just said, okay, that's fine. I'm going to go do it my own way.
Yeah.
And it really was that I just had such a hard time coming to terms with the fact that racism existed in the art world.
Yeah.
I needed, since it gave me so much joy, it helped heal me so much, did all these things that, I just didn't think that it could be in the art world. So it took a number of times for me to kind of get hit over the head and come to terms with that.
Yeah. Do you feel like grappling with that and experiencing that in the earlier days of your artistry led to your research in grad school? Or do you think they were concurrent experiences?
Oh, no, they definitely, it's so funny. While I say that things aren't linear, if you look at my life, is really linear. It is really like one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, to another thing.
So and during grad school, like what was your experience like? Because like you have like such a rich portfolio of work and all of this experience working with museums. What was it like in the beginning when you first started? I imagine you started working with galleries or doing the odd group show or building up the solo shows.
Very hard. It was so hard. I was, let's see, I was in a, was a major show straight out of grad school, at least in San Francisco. And, and those would happen, every once in a while. I think I had my first solo show maybe a year and a half after grad school, something like that. And they were always, I was really, really under the radar.
How do you mean you were under the radar? Like they were watching you, or?
But no, I was under the radar. I wasn't being
Oh,
seen.
I totally misunderstood your expression. Right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you?
I mean, it was like, I was just kind of, doing my work, and that's what I needed to be doing. And by then I was beginning teaching in college and stuff like that. And so I was really quite happy with where my work was, though I wasn't drawing any real income from it. And that continued like that until, I received a major award in, I think, 2008, and that was like, something that I didn't apply for or anything, so it was really, really quite wonderful to receive.
Yeah.
And that began to give me the confidence, oh my God, the world is actually seeing me. Because I knew I was doing something that no one else was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I was aware of that, and I didn't know if it would ever mean anything. I knew that,
Yeah.
my friends will have my work, that's fine.
Mm.
And
So,
I'm just doing it because this is what I need to do. And then it wasn't until a chance meeting with an actual Asian art curator, Asian art historian and professor, that saw my work and then promoted my work. And that was how I got my first major show.
Wow.
It took, and that was not until, the show was in 2015.
Oh, wow.
Huge.
Yeah, so we're talking about a long, long trajectory.
Yeah.
And, and so, and then I got to watch how the expansion, began and continued from there.
I'm really curious too. Like, I feel like this in a way was what led us to want to interview you in the first place. I'm really curious about how you felt in your first days working with like real museums, like institutions, which in a lot of ways is a huge, I imagine a big jump from working with galleries, and especially with,
especially since I wasn't really working with galleries.
Oh, okay.
I was getting shows, but I didn't have a gallery.
That's that's huge.
Okay. I'm just kind of doing my work, and literally I got an email 2 years after I met this historian. He sent me an email and said, "So are you ready for your show?"
Oh, wow.
And
what was
was the beginning of the show, my show at the Welland Museum on Hamilton College's campus in central New York.
So when you received that email and you were sitting at your desk, like, what was your initial response like? Was it like, oh wow, great? Or was it like,
jumping for,
what's that?
I was like jumping for joy. I could not believe this came so left field to me. And I mean, I knew he had done it that way. And then it began 2 years of working very hard.
Yeah.
It was a new museum, a brand new museum. I think I was like the third show exhibit in the museum. And the curator worked with me and very intensely over the course of 2 years.
Wow.
And then, so I learned, it was like, for me, it was because they see themselves as a teaching museum. It was very much like I was getting another graduate degree.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. And in the form of the accolade, or in just the literal experience, like you were getting, like
the literal experience.
Wow.
How put a show together at a museum, how you come to, I had not, let's see, I'm trying to think. I had to get a real studio. I had
Yeah.
I had to, live a very dedicated life to that. And I had to just, I had to produce at a real rate. I couldn't just do 4 pieces a year and be satisfied.
Yeah.
In order for this show to have fresh work, and, so it meant, I had to keep being productive.
So how many pieces were created specifically for the show? Was it all new work?
No, there were a total of 44 pieces in the show, but I created 19 in 2 years.
Wow, that's a lot.
Unbelievable, especially working in fiber arts. That's serious.
Yeah,
that must have been so difficult.
It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
It was definitely a lot of work, and and I learned so much. So that really, and it, I learned how museums work. I learned about PR. I learned, I had meetings with the PR firm. I had, when I had meetings with them in person, going over the layout of the show, how the show would interact, specifically how I was thinking, like the whole concept of, for those abolitionist pieces, those were all because I wanted to create a room where all the abolitionists would be in the room together, and so anyone that came in the room could join in the conversation with them, or if they were not, if no one was in the room, then the abolitionists could talk together.
Hmm.
Go on.
Oh, I was going to say, Martina, one of the curators, mentioned something really interesting to us, that this must have been something you said, talking about how, when you're in the gallery, you're speaking with the pieces, but when you're alone, the pieces are speaking together.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that? Do you feel that in
that whole concept?
Yeah.
Okay, so it goes back to one of my, in DC, my favorite museum is the National Portrait Gallery.
Mine too. It's a beautiful museum. Yeah.
Yeah. And my first trip into the portrait gallery, I was walking through all the rooms, and I came to the back, and there's a back room, and that room, I'm like going around, walking around, I'm looking at daguerreotypes, I'm looking at this, that, and the other, and I just started getting giddy because I realized that this was a room filled with abolitionists, and there was no text to tell you that.
Oh, wow.
That it was really, being part of the Smithsonian is one of, it's probably the most political museum in the country. The Senate and Congress control it. And so they can't do anything that is too political. They always have to be, or right. They have, at least in those days, they was that way. And so I realized, oh my God, this is what they did. They didn't put any of the big name. They didn't put Frederick Douglass in that room. They put him outside the room. And they put John Brown outside the room, kind of the guards to the room.
Wow.
And I just thought that was one of the most subversive things I'd ever seen.
that they
Yeah.
still put on that exhibit, essentially, even without the text.
Oh, it's a permanent exhibit.
Oh, wow.
Right. Yeah, it's a very, you're talking about, it's a very young portrait of Frederick Douglass.
Yeah,
I've seen
he's
it.
on a wall. Yeah, right at the back. It's almost like, there's just like two corners outside of that room. There are two hallways,
Wow.
and so for me, I just thought that was so subversive, because I really think that so many of the psychological, that you can change more, in my opinion, you can change more minds through subtle action, through blatant action.
That's such an interesting thing to think about, too, in terms of something that I think this project, talking about the Touching Roots exhibit and speaking with everyone that was involved in it, something that's coming to the forefront for me is we're able to talk to people with curatorial experience and curators. And it's interesting to think about the way that pieces are placed in a gallery and the way that the flow of a gallery works, how much of that a visitor who's not even considering that element subconsciously is taking in. Where if you're somebody going into a gallery or going into an art show, you might think that you're looking at a piece and then stepping up to the next piece, etc. But the flow of how those pieces communicate in a space and how they relate to one another and the way that you walk through the gallery and are exposed to the information is something I hadn't really considered that much, coming from an artist standpoint
It can
myself.
be lyrical.
Yeah, that it's not just a piece by piece or series by series thing, but that it can be looked at from a macro view like that, where the show itself is an experience. It's not segmented by the frames,
Well, I think that's what a really good curator can do. They can control, or they can set. It's like they're like a movie director. They're creating an environment for you to experience things in.
Interesting.
And so that can control, they have studies on how long, they want people to stay at each piece and stuff like that. And sure, there are lots of arbitrary things that are, all these colors and designs, they fit together well. But there's a whole, if you play that out further, you can use intent.
Yeah.
I have kind of a random question for you that's kind of about the way that museums or books or even popular media depicts a lot of the abolitionists. Someone like John Brown, I feel like historically and in a lot of media is like really controversial, where people kind of like, he was an abolitionist, but a lot of people, in regard to like the Harper's Ferry incident, etc., like see him as, I don't even know, but like I'm kind of interested in what you think of the way that these historical figures are depicted changes from source to source or museum to museum.
Well, John Brown is one of my favorite characters. And I think he really was a good guy.
Yeah.
I think that he had a goal, and this was the way he saw it, and he saw time as an element that needed to be Harper's Ferry needed to happen at X time.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that it's really important when you're looking at someone like, it's very easy to look at someone and have them marked as being crazy,
right,
as he was couched. But if you go and you look at the money trail and you look at the people that were, that the abolitionists, no one's going to say that that Harriet Tubman was crazy.
Yeah.
Very true.
You know, especially since she's being seen in this light now, where her life is so much being brought into the forefront. But you know, it's like in a case like with Harriet Tubman, from everything that I've read, she would have been at Harper's Ferry if she had not taken ill.
Oh, wow,
And
that's interesting.
so, you know, therefore, you know, that lends a bit more credibility. And if you look at other abolitionists like Garrett Smith, who is one of the big money people in the abolitionist movement, who was one of the primary funders of Harper's Ferry. And
Interesting. I haven't heard of him before.
you should check him out. He's really quite important. One of the amazing, one of the things, he has so many interesting things. He's white, he's wealthy.
And he was in the House of Representatives as well, it seems.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And after Harper's Ferry, he checked himself into a mental hospital because the threats were so great for his life.
Oh,
Oh
wow.
my God.
So that's where he went and hid out.
Because that was like an earth-shattering event, wasn't it?
Oh, it really was. I grew up learning about it as it was the catalyst for the Civil War.
Right.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, he is very, very interesting. And one of the things that he did, because if you want to really understand how the Underground Railroad worked, Garrett Smith funded the African American movement into upstate New York
Wow.
by giving land to African Americans to provide the Underground Railroad.
Like a land grant program. Was this land that he
Exactly.
owned, or was this through his work as a politician in New York?
Or land he bought, or what,
Oh.
however, I don't remember what the details of that part are.
Right, so he
Wow.
wasn't just involved in the Underground Railroad, but he was involved in where those people landed. Because that was probably a big deal, because they didn't want to just... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
They became stations.
Right.
Wow.
And there wouldn't be stations otherwise. There just weren't just all these, farmers that wanted to open their door.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, because there was probably a legal matter as well. Maybe were people
Right.
afraid, or maybe more prejudice even in the North.
Yeah, well, the North had all of its own things to deal with.
Right.
Its whole relationship to the slave trade and the funding of the slave trade and stuff.
That's incredible. And with your passion for American history and art and genealogy, I also read that you had discovered your own ancestor who was freed from slavery as well.
Yeah, that's part of my Florida work.
Okay.
That my ancestor Flora, who is 8 generations before me,
Wow.
what brought me into even studying that family, I had no idea that my grandfather was born in Florida, or my great-grandmother, and I grew up knowing my great-grandmother and my grandfather, so I knew very little. And but I was to learn that, and to find out that the family, that Flora had been born into slavery, and there were manumism papers, and there were lots of documents following the family and genealogy.
What were manumism papers, you said?
Yeah. So those are the papers in which she was granted her freedom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that term.
Yeah.
Huh.
And so, so I became very involved in learning her story, as well as George John Frederick Clark's story, who was her life partner.
Wow. And she became a landowner after being freed as well?
Yeah. She, by 1805, she had 500 acres in her name.
Wow.
Oh my God. In what state?
Florida.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
Florida, it was during Florida's Spanish years.
Huh.
What a profound thing. And leading, I guess, out of that, I think one thing that we'd love to talk about is kind of an elephant in the room is touching roots and some of your work that's in the show happening at the MFA right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Could you tell us about some of the pieces you have in that show, or how many you have?
I have one piece in the show, and
Oh,
I
wow.
feel very honored to have that.
What is the title of it?
Memories. And it is significant because it was my first narrative piece.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
And I made it I think I finished it in 91.
What was the process of that piece going into the show? Was it were you contacted for a piece and you were able to choose which one, or did the curators come to you for this one specifically?
They came to my studio in Lowell and visited, and they might have had the piece in mind. I think they did from the beginning, but I gave them a whole studio tour.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I didn't hear for a long time. And then and then it was the process of the piece, the art shippers getting it and stuff.
Could you tell us about Memories? I'm seeing like a lot of, kind of line work happening with these like warm and cold colors. Is this a piece that you feel like relates to your ancestry, or is it maybe referring to personal memories?
It was related to my father's mother. It was the first time that I did an oral history to influence a piece. My father's mother died when he was 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
And was never spoken again.
Mm.
And so for that piece, I interviewed everyone that knew her that was still alive. And I began gathering all sorts of information. And there were no photographs of her.
Oh, wow.
And my reason for going and researching her was because I saw what it did to my father, not having his mother.
Right, and
So,
no trace either.
right, and so I really wanted to follow this path, go find out, about her. And so I did. What's significant is kind of the way that I conceptually worked on it was that in order to weave that cloth, that's a double woven cloth, and is that I painted the warp, which are the long threads, and before they're woven, and I painted two warps, and that had very separate information. They were very intuitive pieces. And then when I sat and I wove it, I would only be able to look at about 4 inches at any one time. And so I was making decisions as to which layer would come up and which layer would not at different times. And so it really became the first piece that I was using this intuitive way of working.
Wow.
And did you feel like that intuitive way of working kind of was informed by the way that, you know, this oral history was conducted, like where you were just kind of following the scent of this of your you know, your paternal grandmother's memory?
Yeah, that's what it was. I said, you know, when I started working this way, it was like, well, I only know what I know.
Right.
And that I was trying to find what my true art was. And so I was trying my best to set up the conditions to be able to let my subconscious go.
Wow. What a beautiful thing. Do you feel like, so we're and you were also involved with the curatorial process, correct?
No, I
you
was
were not.
No.
Gotcha. So in terms of the mission of the show and like the I guess the mission of kind of the MFA, like how do you see these changes happening, you know, maybe that have been happening over the course of decades or even more recently? Like how do you feel about the museums trying to kind of change and, you know, start telling stories?
So excited.
What's that?
I am so excited to see the museum looking through a different lens.
Right.
You know, and to see, you know, see reflections of living history in like sacred walls of America, of the America.
Yeah, it's a really profound thing because the museum especially doesn't really change. Like it's it's a very slow moving ship. By design,
Yes,
probably.
This is one of the old museums.
Right.
Yeah.
They, you know, that this, you know, these changes are really, really significant in terms of making a committed change. You know, and kind of watching that evolution happen for a museum like the MFA is just an extremely hopeful thing. I immediately after I saw the exhibit, I was like calling people up. You have to go see this exhibit. This is really such a major change.
That's so beautiful too. And you know, I've been hearing my whole life that like, oh, the museum need to include more people or be more contemporary or this or that. And like, I think someone with your experience, you know, you've probably seen so many different academic settings, museums, and different parts of the art world versus like, I feel like there's a lot of young people that hear things like the museum wants to change or wants to include more people, and they have a cynical view of it because maybe they don't know what it was like before, or they only, you know, they, you know, have a kind of short memory, like in terms of what the museum is capable of. And I'm just curious, like, do you feel like, I'm trying to find my question here, but I guess, do you wish ever that young people maybe were less cynical about the changes happening, or do you feel like, I'm kind of losing my...
I think that youth is cynical.
Right. Okay.
Number one. Let's just start with that.
Yeah.
And I think that what, you know, that what I hope is that I hope that more and more youth will go and have the experience and let themselves have the experience to see, and then provide their critique.
Right, because there's a lot of
You know?
people that are like, well, if the museum's never going to change, why should I ever even care about it? And they say, I'm going to just abandon that whole idea, and I'm going to just go do my own thing with my own people.
And I think museums are so important.
Yeah. Well, the thing too about the changes within the museum system and why it's so important for these museums to carry on in a more inclusive way is because in a lot of ways museums not only document and protect history, but they also they protect it. They ensure that we're continuing to tell these stories moving forward. We're teaching new generations about them. So they have a responsibility to include as many stories as possible, as accurately as possible.
Absolutely. I think that, that the visual storytelling tools are just so, they're so key. And that, that learning is just, that's what you want, is you want people to have their senses opened and to go experience and learn and make their own decisions. And that the visual component is just so important in that. And that history, I produce my work always keeping in mind that history is traditionally told by those in power. And so every time I make something using the way that I work, or, someone else does, we're changing that historical record.
Yeah.
And the fact that museums are finally hiring hiring curators of color and curators with open minds, and and really rewriting the script is huge.
Yeah.
Right, because in terms of like legacy and recording history and stuff, like you have like a lot of experience doing that independently. Do you feel like you wish there was like, or like what do you see maybe in artists or in the art world today? Like are there things that you wish people knew more about, personal history or oral history or even their own legacies? Like do you feel like there's like, in terms of like how important do you think, documenting specific things about like family or journaling or even just shows you went to, like, because like something I'm a big believer of as well that's maybe a little unrelated is the idea that like I kind of feel like nobody's going to record what I do, so I feel responsible for doing it myself, and I try to like keep track of all these things I'm doing and journaling or even kind of scrapbooking about just my experiences, you know what I mean? But do you feel like, I don't know, I'm kind of losing my question again here, but like do you wish that people did more of that, I guess, like in
I think people, that I think that people need to stop being afraid of history. And that they need to stop, and that they need to see the value in their own story.
Yeah.
And however you chronicle that, that's wonderful.
Right.
Because it is that little bit of tapping into the historical record.
Or even contributing to it.
yeah, where you're challenging what is, you're challenging those in power.
Mm.
You know, that it's really, it's a real act to be able to make a stance and say, this is what I believe. These are the people that are important to me. I mean, went back to at the very beginning when I started including photographs of my family and stuff in my work. It was like there was nothing in textiles that included anyone of color.
Mm.
You know that I was doing it and saying to myself, well, look, kind of justifying it to myself because there was no one going to give me any permission. That my family gives me joy, my family gives me pain, they make me laugh, they make me cry, so that in itself was reason enough and value enough for me to include them in my work.
Mm.
Mm.
That 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 was, and from there I started working on homage pieces. I started really thinking about people that were past, that were so that I shared something in lineage with.
Are these? We're looking now at your website too. Are these the pieces that have? It looks like they have copy transfer images on top of the weaving.
Those were my first ones with family. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after that, then I did a couple pieces, like I don't know if they're on the site or not, a homage piece to George Washington Carver. And that was not based on him and the peanut. It was really looking at him as one of the really founders of what we now know as CSAs, which are community supported agriculture.
Mm.
Because back in I believe, I want to say around the 30s, that's what he was doing in Tuskegee, with how do you sustain these farmers following the Depression, especially Black farmers. And so by setting up community supported agriculture where people would buy shares of farms, and so they were guaranteed an income through the year. And that, and the fact that he was a trained weaver and he was a knitter and would sit and knit in his lab with his lab coat on. And so I really felt like he was a kindred soul.
Mm-hmm.
What a beautiful thing. And to kind of also about touching roots too, I'm kind of curious in terms of museums and the public and people of all ages and backgrounds coming to the show. I'm wondering, what do you hope people take away from this and visiting it, and while it's up throughout the year, like, because this is obviously a very, very different show than the MFA has done in the past, and that should be recognized. And I'm kind of wondering, is do you have? Go ahead.
I think that this will increase community involvement in the museum.
Mm-hmm.
It will definitely make Black and brown people, feel like it is their museum. They are entitled to be there, and engage with the art that much more. I think that the whole layout of the exhibit is just, so beautiful and thoughtful.
Yeah.
And you're just really seeing this. I think that it really helps you to understand diaspora.
Mm.
which is, I think, for so many people, it is, that there's a lacking of an understanding of really what is a diaspora and how it have continuous lineage for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, what an incredible thing. Karen, I want to thank you so much for coming on our show and for opening up your story to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. I enjoy it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's like,
when you actually pull it all together, will you send me a link?
Of
please?
course, yeah.
oh my God, absolutely. Oh, you got something to say, Theo?
I had one last question I wanted to sneak into. I should have asked this earlier, but the work that you were talking to us about, the historical research that you did on weaving in grad school, is that work published anywhere that's publicly accessible?
Yeah, you can read it if you, let me think. If you go to Textile Society of America,
Okay.
and you're looking for symposium, whatever, it's, let's see, I might have
Symposium
to look it up.
proceedings?
Yeah, and it's I think it's the University of Nebraska that houses it. They always send me a thing telling me how many people have read it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
If you wouldn't mind, we just started a blog portion of our website where we're linking projects that people we interview have going on. And I think it would be awesome to link to this so that people listening could look into it and read what you discovered.
Sure. I'll let's see. How can I best do this? I'll look it up. Can you give me an email?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
you
of
got
course.
it. Yeah, we can connect with all the links and stuff after, but thank you honestly so much for talking to us. This has been profound, and I think one of our best episodes yet. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to get the story out and to get the word out about Touching Roots and everyone's work and thoughts on the show.
Great. Good luck with it all.
Yeah,
Thank you so
you're an
much.
excellent artist and storyteller, and we're honored to have had you on the show.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I really
All right. Well, what's that?
thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Yeah, thank you, and I hope the rest of your day is good, and we'll be in touch about the release of the show. And yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. That was Karen Hampton, award-winning artist and weaver. The following is an excerpt from the artist statement on her website, kdhampton.com.
As an artist of color, I have made a lifelong commitment to creating artwork that responds to the lives of my ancestors. My lens is anthropology, and I study my own genealogy. I travel in my ancestors' footsteps, I walk the roads where they lived, explore the plantations where they were enslaved. I am the storyteller. As their medium, I provide a vehicle for my ancestors' spirits to transcend history and remain as historical memory. It was a pleasure to speak with Karen, and we hope you go and see her work for yourself in Touching Roots, Black Ancestral Legacies in the Americas. This exhibition will be on view until May 31st of 2023.
Thanks so much for listening, and tune in next week for the 4th episode in the 7-part series only on Boston Art Podcast. Thank you.
Boston Art Podcast is an independent DIY production by Brian Huntress and Theodora Earthworms. The information contained in this episode represents the views and opinions of the original creators or our guests, and does not represent any institution, organization, or business. Find us on Instagram at Boston Art Podcast, and tune in for a new episode every Friday. Thank you for listening.